Tie-in with the offertory music that you just heard. It came from a movie that was released in 1971 called Zachariah that was loosely based on this plot line of Siddhartha, the novel by Hermann Hesse. Don Johnson, who would be in, Miami Vice, was in that movie when he was very, very young, younger than Valen is now, probably. And all of the music in the movie has been forgotten except for that folk song that you just heard. So it wasn't an accident. I'm going to introduce Valen Siddhartha Shankar-Brown, a professional sales and international business major, co-captain of the Centurion sales team, Alpha Kappa Psi Business Fraternity, former vice president of membership, Poverty and Homelessness Conference, the annual event to end poverty and homelessness, a student leader, Hatters University mentor and tutor. Hatters is what you call people at Stetson because of the hat. Because of the hat. The hat that changed the world. Catalyst Global Youth Initiative student leader. And a wonderful human being who we've had the pleasure of welcoming to our pulpit as our guest multiple times before. And welcome back, Valen. Everybody help me welcome Valen back.
Yes. Thank you. Well, good morning. So today I'll be taking you on a little journey of Siddhartha. First of Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, as most people know, and then we'll touch upon the Hermann Hesse novel just a bit, because I read that book I think 2 years ago, because I was getting into kind of my history. Oh,
I'll give you the hand.
yes. Perfect. Now I don't have to lean down. Yes, perfect. So yeah, like I was saying, I read the novel about 2 years ago just because I was getting interested in my own ancestry. I'm in Siddhartha, my own name. So then I came across the novel. I got super inspired by it. It's a fictional story, of course, but it is inspired by real Buddhist truths and inspirations. And once I read it, it kind of sparked my journey. So yeah. There we go. So for today's presentation, I first want to touch upon his life story, of course, concisely. His birth and prophecy, which is the origin of his story, his birth. But more so than that, the real origin of his story is his foresights. He eventually left his palace and life of luxury and traveled the world. Then after that, we'll talk about his legacy, how he became a teacher and founded Buddhism. Then after that, we're going to talk about some lessons of his, the Four Noble Truths, alongside the Eightfold Path and its legacy influence, and then we'll have a little group reflection. And then to end it off, you get two speakers instead of one, because my lovely mother will come up and give a poem. So yes. So to first start off on his birth and prophecy, so Siddhartha was born about 563 BCE in a part called Lumbini. That is present-day Nepal. And back then, though, it was still part of India. So it was a part of the Indian Empire at the time. And so he was born then. His mother, Queen Maya, actually had a prophecy, like a dream, when it came to her before his birth, his birth. And what that dream was a white elephant with 6 tusks. The yogis, which are the sages in India at the time, that's what they're called, they said that your son is going to be an extraordinary human being. It was like an omen, a sign, right? And so with that, the yogis also gave a prophecy with it, a prediction to his father. Either Siddhartha would be a great conqueror and become an emperor so large that India will expand over time, or he'll become a great sage. And so with that prophecy, his father took some precautions as a king, per se. The yogis basically said that if Siddhartha was exposed to certain sights, he would go on the path to become a sage. And of course, him being a king, he was like, no, my son needs to be another king, a better king, right? So he sheltered his life. That meant for the first 27 years of his life, or 28, 29 years of his life, he had everything. He had 3 mansions. He had a mansion for the monsoon season, he had a mansion for the summer, and he had a mansion for the winter. His father got all the princesses of the land, made him choose a bride. He chose a bride. He just traveled that time and just spent his life in luxury. Food, elaborate events, and stuff like that. He was living a princely life, but he was very sheltered. He didn't see any old people, any death, anything like that. However, through that whole time, his mind always sparked with these big ideas and big concepts that he could never quite place because he was in that sheltered environment, right? And him being a prince that he was, of course, that led to him eventually getting on a carriage and leaving the palace for once. And so at age 29, he finally left the palace, and that leads to our... Is it? Okay, cool. And then that led to our 4 sights. The first thing being on the road with his chaperone, or his... I don't know what you call the people on the horses. What do you call those people with the carriage? I guess so, entourage, yeah. The person riding the horse, he was on the carriage on the back. The first thing he saw was an old person on the side of the road. He never saw old people. He was like, what is going on? The coach driver, or I think that's what they're called, coach driver was like, that's aging. Everyone ages. He's like, aging, what is that? And so he was very confused, very bamboozled, and that led into the second sight, which was a sick man. So first he saw an old man who was just aging, very old, still alive, still healthy, but just old. And then he saw a sick man on the side of the road suffering. And he was in great pain and great illness, and the prince has never seen such a thing. So not only was he bamboozled by the first sight, but the second sight as well. And then that led into a third sight. He kept driving across the town or the villages, and he actually came across a funeral procession. He saw family members weeping, and then he saw a dead body in a casket, right, about to be burned. And so that was the first time he saw death too, because in that sheltered life, his father made sure to have no old people, no death, and no sickness around. And so he was very bamboozled, he was very appalled, but more so than that, he had his eyes opened. He was like, holy, like, this is the world. The world I was living in was just a small part of it. And so that led into his final sight, which was actually a traveling monk on the road who was, I think, speaking to a crowd or so, and that kind of sparked his spiritual journey. So he saw 4 sights, right? And so after that, that awakens his spiritual crisis within him. At first, he's kind of panicking. At first, like anyone, if you were born a prince like this and you see all these sights and you don't know what's going on, it's just like a newborn, coming into the world, looking at all the sights. You don't really know what's going on. And so that led him back to the palace, of course. He went back at night, and he actually stayed in the palace because he did have his wife, and he actually had a son at that time, a small boy, about a year old, and he stayed there for a year. And in that year, he just spent his whole time pondering, right? Pondering these sights of his. But eventually, enough was enough. He couldn't handle it anymore, and at age 29, he leaves his son and wife. He leaves the palace, and he actually becomes a wandering ascetic. That is a yogi. That's what you can also call them sages, yogis at the time. They're just traveling seekers, as they say. They're seekers of the truth, the path. This leads to him leaving the palace forever. He not only abandoned his wealth, power, but also his privilege, or not privilege, but his kingship, his heirship. So he was no longer a prince. He cast it all off, including his wife and son, which in my mind is a little kind of unethical, but whatever, he's a great sage, I can't say anything about that. He traveled the world. He became a wandering ascetic, but through it all, he was through the self-denial, right? He didn't really know where to go. He was trying to find a path to enlightenment, like us all. You have highs and lows, ups and downs. It's a great journey. But for years, he wandered with yogis, holy men who practiced severe feasting or fasting, self-denial, and meditation, and he, through the process, went through extremes. And I mean extremes comparing to, like, even his fellow yogis, like he would not eat. So by the end of his journey at this time, he was basically just a sack of skin and bones. I mean, he feasted so long, some reports say 4 years, 5 years. Who knows what the truth is, but that's what the historical accounts say. And so they said that he really was just, the only sustenance he needed was his enlightenment. And so that kind of led to his middle pathway, right? So at first he was down the super extreme road. driving himself to borderline death. I'm sure he was on some hallucinations or frenzies if he didn't eat that long, right? And so he rejects extreme fasting by sitting on the Bodhi tree. Does anyone know the Bodhi tree? It's kind of famous. I don't know if you've kind of seen him depicted sitting under it. But anyways, he goes to his Bodhi tree, which is very famous across India or modern-day Nepal now. And he says, I'm not going to get up from this tree until I find the truth within myself, or the Enlightenment, which is nirvana in Buddhism. And so he sits down there for a few days, still starving, and through it all, he's working it out in his mind and his spiritual process. And he finally comes across a figure, a conjured figure named Mara. She's like a translucent demon smoke type of figure who's all about temptation and lust and indulgence in life, right? And he combats that by just sitting there and meditating and going through enlightenment. And through that process, he finds nirvana, which is the stages of death and liberation, of course, and rebirth. And so with that, he transformed into Buddha. So with that, after years of punishing his body, Siddhartha realized truth would not be found in extremes, neither indulgence nor self-torture. He discovered what he called the middle way, a balance between the two. He sat under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, vowing not to rise until he understood. There he faced Mara, a figure representing temptation, fear, and doubt. But Siddhartha overcame these trials. At dawn, he achieved enlightenment, nirvana, a deep understanding of suffering, the cycle of rebirth, and the path of liberation. And so from then on, Siddhartha was no longer called Gautama Siddhartha. He was called a Buddha. And so the awakened one, right? That's what Buddha means. He spent the next 45 years traveling across all of India, spreading his teachings after that. Teaching anyone to listen, kings, peasants, merchants. There's a lot of stories. There's someone called Asoka the Great, if anyone's familiar with Asoka the Great. He was an emperor who came after Siddhartha's time, but Asoka the Great was this great warrior king conqueror, right? And he conquered a lot of India afterwards, took over all his rivals, but about 45 years in, he actually dedicated his life to Siddhartha, building statues and temples all across the world. And that's some of these things that you'll see. Some of the statues that I put there are actually built by Asoka the Great. So that's just to show a little bit of his influence, right? He started his Sangha, which is a monastery. It started off in his local hometown where he was born in Nepal, and then expanded all across India. I mean, do we have any Buddhists in here today? Some Buddhists? So we do have 2 Buddhists here. So as you can see, it's still going on, it's still striving. So yeah, and then at age 80, he does die. But he reaches the ultimate liberation, which is called Nirvana. And through that, he has complete liberation, right? From his teachings, Buddhism spreads across not only Asia and eventually the whole world, but it has over 500 million people even today. So he has a great legacy, right? And that kind of leads to his 4 noble truths. I think it's kind of funny because he had 4 sites, and then there's 4 noble truths, which he comes up with, so the 4 number is kind of auspicious in Buddhism. And so the first thing is life is suffering, the truth of suffering, which is called dukkha. I think that's how you pronounce it, dukkha. And then the second one is the truth, or the truth of the cause of suffering. Why do you suffer? This cause of suffering is attachment and craving, and our constant grasping between the two. And then finally, it's the truth of the cessation of suffering, the ending of suffering. So first he discovered that life is suffering. What are the causes of that suffering? Then he figures out, well, you can actually stop the suffering. And then he's like, well, if there's a problem or a cause, then there's a solution. So what is the pathway to stop such suffering, right? So it's kind of simple, but it's radical. He kind of shows that it's fate, but since it has a cause, it therefore has a solution. So you can, improve upon that. So with that being said, how do you do such a thing? You talk about all these great truths. So what is the path? Well, the path is called the Eightfold Path, right? So there's 8 things, and we'll kind of dive into them right now. The first thing is the right view. And what that kind of means is understanding reality clearly. Kind of an objective viewpoint, because all of us view the world in a different way, right? We all come up from different upbringings, from different perspectives. Life is kind of subjective in a bit. But he says that, there is a kind of universal baseline, I guess, or universal basis that life that everyone kind of experiences life through. And so that includes suffering and actions that have consequences, right? So the application is seeing problems as they are, not how we wish them to be. I wish my college kids and peers kind of viewed life this way because they do not, so. But it's accepting stress instead of denying it rather than procrastinating, which is a thing that I deal with. And then it's working to reduce it, right? That leads into the right intention, commitment to self-improvement and compassion. Like you just said, imagine a world with compassion and empathy. That's what I think the world should be. And so the application is choosing to act from kindness and not from greed and anger. And if we know anything about humans in history, anger and greed come up quite a bit. So, the example is setting goals with the intent to help others, not just self-gain. And it's kind of funny because it seems kind of counterproductive, but even through my tutoring at school, I found that when I help others, I also help myself and I get better at the same time. So I think teaching is a great thing. So that kind of leads into the third thing, which is the right speech, right? Speak truthfully, avoid gossip and harm with words. Don't lie to save face and don't spread negativity. It's like in class, we're not in class, I guess it's been a while for y'all, but for me, in class, I have some group presentations and group projects, and sometimes I do have some members that are like, what are you doing? But then I have to be nice, of course, so, you have to give honest but respectful feedback. I think that's even for this community as well, just for any community. And that leads to right action, behave ethically and avoid harming others, especially in today's world. No stealing, cheating, or violence. Just doing what's right if no one's watching. I think it's kind of interesting how all these things are very simple and yet so profound. Because I even remember my mom just telling me always act like someone's watching you, or some of my teachers say test like you're always being watched, stuff like that. And I kind of find it interesting that these simple truths hold so much meaning in our lives, even 2,500 years ago. So yeah, that leads to our fifth thing, which is right livelihood, earn a living without causing harm, work in a way that benefits and not exploits, jobs that don't destroy the environment or prey upon people. I know a lot of people, especially some of them in the business school, the ethics come up quite a bit. I know a lot of people, even alumni, who have gained a lot of success, but doing what they do, I don't know if it necessarily helped the world, right? It kind of helped them and their family and their company, but long-term overall, did it have the impact that was best suited for the world? I don't know. So that's kind of just something to keep in mind. That leads to right effort, directing energy towards positive states of mind, cutting off harmful habits early and cultivate healthy ones. Catch yourself before you spiral into anger or procrastination, right? You want to kill those bad habits and cultivate the good habits. I think it takes 60 days for a habit to form. I think 60 to 90 days, so I have some hope. I have some hope to not procrastinate. That leads into our seventh thing, which is right mindfulness. I think this is the biggest thing, actually, one of the biggest things. At least when my experience, when it comes to talking to my friends and stuff, a lot of them, I don't know if they're lying to themselves or they're just not aware of the things they're doing, but I think having that awareness is kind of the first step, right, to make a change. You need to be aware of how you feel or the reason why you feel that way or the action that you're taking. So it's the awareness of body, feelings, and thoughts and reality, right? It's an application of just being present. I think all of this, I think Siddhartha, his biggest thing of, the yogis were taking it to the extreme, not eating and not living to, elevate and to enlighten themselves. I think he found a perfect balance to kind of try to eliminate all the distractions so he could be present in this life, right? And so that kind of leads into right concentration, deep focus through meditation, clarity, and calm. Does anyone meditate here? I meditate. Okay, so we have a lot of people who meditate. I think personally, anyone who has raised their hand, I think you've seen the benefits of meditating as well. I have personally not experienced a Siddhartha Gautama type of enlightenment where I'm just like pure Zen. However, every single time I do meditate, I always feel better, right? No matter even if it's just a small incremental change in my mood, I find myself always leaving that meditation session better than when I first sat in, I guess, rather than stood in. But so yeah, it's training the mind to steady itself, meditation, and even prayer. I think prayer and meditation are very similar. I think in the same sort of context, you could argue that they're one and the same, just depending on the outlet of your faith. So yeah, that kind of leads into his legacy, right? So he started 2,500 years ago, And it not only continues today, but I'm sure it'll continue 1,000 years from now. So he has a lasting, longing legacy, right? And that legacy, like we said, has the right intentions. I don't think it's there to hurt anyone or do any harm. I think it's only there to spread good. And so, yeah, it's one of the world's major religions even today, about 500 million followers. That leads into a little group reflection. If you want to, you don't have to, of course, but if everyone would just take a minute and kind of think about one thing in their life that causes them stress or does not do any good to your life, just think about it. Hold it in your mind as a picture and imagine it as a leaf. Imagine it just for 1 minute, close your eyes, and imagine that one thing that in your life, an obstacle, that is just a leaf flowing down a river, and it's just slowly going down the stream. I hope the leaf went away now. And so that leads us to our second thing, to kind of come out of that trance. That leads to our book recommendation, which is Hermann Hesse's novel, or Hesse's Siddhartha novel. Again, like I said in the start, I read it about 2 years ago. If you were interested in the presentation or any of the teachings, he has a very interesting story because his Siddhartha is not Siddhartha Gautama. Rather, it's a different Siddhartha, an intellect, who meets Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, but has a completely different path. But it leads to the same place, and I think that's why it's very interesting, and I think that's why I gravitated towards it, because rather than Siddhartha Gautama, who kind of isolated and focused purely internal and on spreading his teachings, this Siddhartha actually goes through a whole travel, a whole exploration, meeting merchants, meeting courtesans, meeting so many different people, but through it all, still going through that spiritual process, right? So I think, as they say, I don't know the exact verbatim term, but it's like, there's many truths or many paths to one truth, and I think that kind of inspired me. So if you guys are bored or you want to read a good novel, I would definitely recommend this novel. But to end it off, I just want to thank you again for having me up here to give a little bit about his life. And to end it off, we'll have my lovely mother here give a poem. So yeah.
I'm so proud of Valen. His middle name is Siddhartha, and I love that you all give opportunities for youth to, for him to develop his voice and intellect and to share. So thank you all for that. What a gift that is, and to see him kind of grow each time he comes up here. I'm so proud of you. So this poem I actually wrote, inked, as Valen was talking to me. I felt very inspired, and I wrote this poem. And I dedicate it to everyone here today, and especially to my son, Valen Siddhartha. Siddhartha, beyond the veil. He left behind the clamoring kingdoms, where incense spiraled like unanswered prayers, where desire wore devotion's hollow mask, and golden cups spilled into emptiness. Barefoot, he wandered through hunger's shadow, through hollow mantras and silent echoes of 1,000 vanished teachings, footprints lost in monsoon dust. Truth. He learned truth does not crash like thunder, it waits, it listens, a breath beneath the roar. By the river's edge, he watched time spiral, a dharma wheel turning endlessly, child into monk, passion into ash, birth brushing hands with death. Let us call it beloved. The world has never broken, but only named too often, fragments fragmented again and again, a lone leaf drifted on the current, neither chasing nor fleeing, a journey that is both surrender and song. The moon rose over still waters unmoving, yet reflected in every trembling wave. You see, Siddhartha, sometimes he spoke no words, but had he spoken at those times, his voice would bloom, a lotus opening wide in the sacred silence between questions. And in that quiet unraveling, he became the unseen breath, the pulse beneath the silence, the endless unfolding of being, becoming. Siddhartha, beyond the veil, where no path remains, all roads return to each other. Being, becoming, home, sweet. We are love.
Thank you. Here we go. Can we give one more round of applause for Valen and Rajni? And what you have shared with us today.